away from its capital city, Panama is one of the world's most ecologically diverse nations. Yet massive new hydroelectric power projects are seeing pristine rivers dammed and virgin rainforest flooded. The government says it's vital for economic growth. Big business is cashing in, and even the UN has awarded carbon credits. But for the indigenous Nabe people, whose homes are vanishing underwater, it's a catastrophe. Now they're fighting back.
Panama forms the bridge between the two continents of North and South America. It's home to an astonishing array of plants and animals. Rivers cascade through mountains and jungles to the Caribbean and Pacific. It's a tropical paradise. Panama is also the fastest growing economy in the Americas. And the country's capital, Panama City, is a boomtown, a playground for the wealthy elite. But all this comes at a price. It's early March, and these protesters are from Panama's largest ethnic minority, the Nabe. Families have come from all over the country, and they've been camped outside the National Assembly building for weeks. It's a show of support for Sylvia Carrera, their elected chief, known as the Cacique. She's negotiating with the government over controversial hydroelectric projects in the semi-autonomous homeland of the Nabe, known as the Comarca. The government claims the projects are needed to fuel the growing economy. But the homes of thousands of people will be at risk if they go ahead.
¿Dónde se ha detenido? Ahorita mismo hay una hidroeléctrica llamada Barro Blanco S.A. en que perjudica a la comarca Nove, Buglé y áreas adyacentes.
Si sigue diálogo, nosotros mantenemos. Si de ahí una semana más, 15 días dice de eso, no sé, pero Cacique va. Ella es nuestro líder.
Suddenly, the mood changes. Gunshots are heard. A moment later, injured protesters appear. Unprovoked, the police have fired shotguns into the crowd. The Cacique emerges from the assembly. For a moment, it looks like the talks will stall. But the government's intimidation hasn't worked.
Creo que el miedo no hay. Porque si Dios con uno, ¿quién contra uno? Así que creo que el pueblo de tener miedo ya debiera tener miedo. Así.
The young man leading the chants is Ricardo Miranda. Ricardo has agreed to take us to his village on the banks of the Tabasara, one of several threatened by the Barro Blanco Dam. Here is a 3-hour walk from the nearest road.
Entonces, cuando era un poco pequeño, pues este era el lugar donde yo vivía. Esa es la iglesia donde nosotros nos congregábamos para alabar a nuestro Dios. Vamos a decir, cuando cultivamos en el monte, cosechamos arroz, yuca, o vamos a decir, creamos gallinas, eso. Aquí es el lugar donde nosotros lo cocinamos. Nosotros vivimos de la tierra, vivimos de la naturaleza y nos alimentamos y vivimos un continuo intercambio con la naturaleza, ¿no? Hay una escuela donde nosotros enseñamos a nuestros niños a hablar ngove, o ngove buglé, hablar y escribirla. Entonces, al venir la hidroeléctrica, esto desaparecería. Esto simplemente y llanamente queda bajo el agua.
Mira, nosotros no por ignoranteza o no porque no queremos el progreso, sino que nosotros sabemos que de esa construcción de este proyecto no nos va a traer nada bueno. Entonces desapareceríamos de aquí, de este terreno, no tendríamos la misma felicidad, no podríamos bañarnos al río, ni podríamos tener comer lo que el río mantiene.
The wildlife of the Tabasara is also threatened by the dam. The Tabasara rain frog is unique to this stretch of the river. Oscar Sogandares, a local environmentalist, fears what will happen.
These are highly critically endangered species, and it only inhabits this area. Once its habitat is destroyed, we will see no more frog. Surprisingly, the environmental impact statement makes no mention of them.
The valley is also home to numerous CITES-listed animals, including rare boa constrictors and iguanas. However, Ganissa, the company behind the project, insists there's no risk. Their environmental and social summary report states that these species have the ability to move to distant areas in the event they are located in the area to be flooded.
Ahora que no va por ahí, ustedes van a ver ahora por allá. Bonito, hasta allá abajo hay una isleta grande. Allá en Kia ustedes van a llegar ahora. ¿Ves? Es libre de nosotros caminar por aquí. Pero ellos vienen y le van a hacer el malo a nosotros, le va a acabar lo que es de nosotros. Y ni jamás nunca quiere que nosotros caminamos por aquí. Venimos por aquí, ¿qué es lo que pasa? Destruye nosotros, que no tenemos derecho a caminar. Porque esto ya es de ellos. Esto no es de ellos no es Dios que hizo esto para que ellos vengan a mandar esto. El que manda es Dios allá arriba que nos dejó para nosotros aquí.
Le voy a demostrar
Italo Jimenez is leading the fight against the dam. He has seen it all before. 13 years ago, plans for another dam threatened to flood his village.
De que hay otro estudio de impacto ambiental nuevo que es la que no hace efecto o impacto alguno, no, y eso no es cierto. Lo cierto es que es el mismo tipo de modelo, es el mismo tipo de módulo de la construcción de los ríos, de lo que va a hacer el efecto a la población. Aquí tengo el personal, todo este personal vive en la orilla del río. ¿Cómo van a contestar ellos la seguridad y la tranquilidad de este pueblo cuando ellos están divulgando en medios públicos que no es cierto lo que estamos diciendo? Entonces, esta es la prueba del mapa. Ellos no han cambiado otro tipo de modelo de construcción. Es el mismo que mantienen de siempre. En ramales,
Italo has received death threats, but vows to fight on. The problem intensified when right-winger Riccardo Martinelli was elected president in 2009. His administration, dubbed the Government of Entrepreneurs, is behind dozens of new construction projects. Over 60 dams are planned for the tiny country. For the Narbe and Panama's poor, it's a catastrophe. Martinelli appointed Jorge Fabrea to negotiate with the Narbe. He speaks for the government.
Since we have no oil, hydroelectric energy is very important for us. Our economy has been growing steadily for the last years. As a matter of fact, Panama has, I believe, one of the biggest growing economy in Latin America at this moment. And from what I understand from the Secretary of Energy, from the government, the demand for energy will keep growing steadily for the next years. So hydroelectric plants are very useful. It's a clean energy and it's cheaper than burning oil. So it's very important for us.
But what about the human cost? This is the Chan 75 dam. Last May, the government announced that flooding would soon commence. But the valley was home to hundreds of Narbe families. While some had already left, many were still living in the path of the water. Within days, the valley looked like this. Because of its remoteness, we were the first journalists here since the flooding. It's a tragedy that has gone virtually unreported. This is all that can be seen of Changuinola Ariba, The rest lies deep beneath the water.
Entonces lo que sucede que ellos no dieron aviso y la gente de la comunidad de Changuinola arriba, como estuvo creciendo, la creciente creciendo, entonces ellos se fueron huyendo de aquí porque el agua se iba inundando las casas. Toda la gente de la comunidad se fueron para arriba huyendo para vivir, entonces ellos quedaron durmiendo donde la selva ahí, con los animales.
Esa comunidad tenía una escuela, alrededor de esa escuela vivía todo lo que los moradores de ahí, pues. Entonces esa escuela mantenía una matrícula de 97 estudiantes de primer grado hasta sexto grado, en lo cual yo laboré ahí 2 años seguidos, yo laboré en esa escuela.
Carolina's house was in the village of Guayaboa. She can still see the roof.
Yo tenía café sembrado hasta aquí, hasta allá abajo en el río. Yo tenía fibra ahí sembrado. Yo tenía palo ahí y se inundó todo. Y ese café ya está todo muerto. Y ese café no me daba un día nada más, eso para todo el año. Y para ellos eso no era nada.
Nos sentimos, mejor dicho, como engañados, pues, por lo que pasó. Bueno, porque se prometió finca, se prometió mejora se prometió una mejora total, cosa que hasta el momento no hemos visto que sea cumplida. Y construcción de casa, construcción de nueva finca, estudio universitario, estudio para los niños, beca, que después que cumplió 1 año, entonces no hemos visto más nada.
For those remaining, life has become immeasurably harder. Without boats, these people at the far end of the reservoir find themselves marooned. It's particularly hard for the sick, like this child. A year ago, he'd have been treated just a short walk away at a health centre, which now lies deep underwater. An expensive boat ride and a 2-hour drive to the town of Changuinola is beyond the means of many. In February, the Nabe decided that enough was enough and set up roadblocks on the Pan American Highway. The Pan American Highway is the main artery of Panama, bringing food to the capital. The Nabe were demanding an audience with the government. President Martinelli's response was to authorize a military-style crackdown on the peaceful protesters. Even now, it's hard to say how many people were shot.
Sí hay compañeros que están desaparecidos, no sabemos. Nada más lo que único que saben son las 2 personas, que es mi primo Jerónimo y el otro muchacho que también lo mataron, que era Mauricio. Son lo que eso, pero supuestamente hay que desconocemos el paradero de ellos. Estas son unas bombas que usó aquel día, y todo esto que se ven aquí también, que es un momento que usó. Esto también, que es gas pimienta. Y esto que también lo usó en ese momento, también son unos gases que usaron, gas lacrimógeno. Todo esto lo usaron porque en contra de nosotros, todos los compañeros.
There was no escape for the injured as hospitals came under attack.
Hey, muchachos. Muchachos, la mano atrás. Pon la mano atrás, muchachos. Pon la mano atrás. Coopera. Quítate el problema, quítate el problema.
At least one body was taken away by the police. A month after the crackdown, the press is still kept away from injured protesters. We filmed this armed guard on a mobile phone before sneaking our camera into Santiago's main hospital. Patients with bullet wounds are eager to tell the outside world what happened.
A 1 kilómetro de distancia del área de la protesta. En eso empezaron a llegar los helicópteros de la Policía Nacional y empezó a reprimir a todos los indígenas que estaban en ese lugar. Y en eso iba yo. Y en eso donde me dispararon y pues, me dispararon la pierna. La bala quedó incrustada entre los huesos. Aquí los doctores me lo sacaron. Eso reposa en el archivo del hospital. O sea, la bala quedó metida en el hueso y donde los médicos ya mi vida no es igual. No sé.
The police acted very professionally. It's a question of rights. You have the right to protest, and you have the right to disagree with what the government is doing, but you don't have the right to affect the rest of the people's rights also. Like, closing the Inter-American highway. And it was very unfortunate events, but I believe that the police acted very professionally.
In fact, the crackdown was more like a military offensive than a police operation. All communications were cut for 3 days while the attacks lasted. But in Panama, the police are above the law. President Martinelli brought in controversial legislation preventing the prosecution of police officers.
If you are a police and, for example, you kill somebody, you are not going to jail. Since the arrival of Martinelli, the militarization of the police is growing every day. He has the control of the National Assembly. He has the control of the Attorney General Office. He has the control of the Supreme Court. He has the control of all the institutions in this country, and they also approved recently in the National Assembly different laws that permit the police to act, to do illegal things, and they are not going to receive any punishment.
4 days after the violence, Felix Wing headed an alliance of NGOs which visited the scene of the police crackdown.
We were able to document 15 human rights violations, ranging from the suspension of constitutional guarantees, the suspension of communications in the area, rape, mistreatment of detainees. There were 2 deaths. One of a person that was shot at short range with a shotgun. That was Jerónimo Rodriguez Montezuma, the first death. And the second death was also due to a shotgun shot at short range. And this was Mauricio Mendez. He was a 16-year-old, a teenager.
President Martinelli's new law means that there will be no justice for the parents of Mauricio, who was just an innocent bystander.
Mauricio era un muchacho que no se metía con nadie. Era un muchacho que él
Work continues on the massive Barro Blanco site, just a few miles downstream from Kia. The Tabasara villagers are fighting to preserve their way of life, but the government is determined to press on.
There is one thing that I have to make it clear. We are not going to cancel Barro Blanco. Barro Blanco project is under construction and it will continue.
Then the minister dropped a bombshell. Another dam is to be imposed on yet more communities further down the river.
It's not under construction yet, but the contract is already signed. This is the same river. Here's Tabasara number 2, and here's Barro Blanco. And there's not a single house affected through this.
Despite what the minister says, the community school in Kia is one of several which will be lost if the Tabasara is dammed. It was built by the community, an attempt to keep their culture alive. Panamanian law is supposed to safeguard the rights of villages like these.
The Panamanian Constitution protects the interests of indigenous communities and their autonomy, the collective property or ownership on their land. No authority should approve a project that communities, indigenous communities are opposed to.
All the people who are involved in these investments are breaking the law because they established these dams without the agreement of the people, particularly the indigenous population who are in this particular place.
Despite the protests and intimidation, the UN is endorsing Barro Blanco. It has been awarded carbon credits worth millions. It's the icing on the cake. In their report, the team sent to assess Barro Blanco wrote that the most relevant communities involved in the area of the project were consulted, and all of them supported the project actively. During our trip, we couldn't find a single local person in favour of the dam. But perhaps those being forced off their land are not what the UN consider the most relevant communities. When campaigners pointed out this glaring error, the UN's Climate Change Secretariat took nearly a year to respond, finally writing to the villagers to inform them that they had missed the international stakeholders' commenting period, a one-month window in 2009 which no one had heard of.
La mujer en OVE cuando se ve dentro de la lucha, porque nosotros como madre de todos estos niños de la generación OVE, nosotros nos sentimos parte y comprometidos a tener que luchar por un futuro que le tiene que corresponder a nuestros hijos.
This list was compiled using official government data, but political pressure prevented its publication. Now, for the first time, this information has been made public. It's a list of hydroelectric schemes planned across the country. The names of the directors and shareholders reads like a roll call of Panama's richest families. The cards are stacked against the cacica as she negotiates with the minister.
Yo se lo dije a ministro estos días, ministro, por favor, póngate mano en el pecho. Creo que sin luz podemos vivir, pero sin agua no podemos vivir. Porque cuando se sienta en la mesa, ahí se pone agua y yo creo que toma más de 2 litros, mientras que a mí me da agua y ahí está. Pero sí, yo voy a seguir defendiendo. Yo se lo dije, que voy a seguir defendiendo.
Well, she doesn't speak too much, but when she does, believe me, she makes her point very clear.
Todo con esto que el gobierno ha hecho, el pueblo jamás se va a doblegar. Jamás se va a doblegar. Porque el pueblo va a seguir defendiendo su madre tierra, que le da de vivir, que es sustento diario, y la generación futura que viene.
In March, the cacica signed an accord with the government. The deal means that any dam building in Narbe lands will require approval from indigenous authorities and in some cases a referendum. But for the people of the Tabasara, it's a hollow victory. The Barro Blanco was excluded from the agreement.